Welcome back to Lil Tastic. Today we're going to be reading Chester's Way and The Best Nest by Kevin Hendricks by P.D. Eastman. Today we're going to start on The Best Nest by P.D. Eastman. Oh, by the way, I got new nails. Mr. Bird was happy. He was happy he had to sing. This was Mr. Bird's song. I love my house, I love my nest. In all the world, my nest is the best. Then Mrs. Bird came out of the house. It's not the best nest, she said. I'm tired of this old place, said Mrs. Bird. I hate it. Let's look for a new place right now. So they left the old place to look for a new one. This place looks nice, said Mrs. Bird. Let's move here. It's a tree. But somebody else had already moved in. So they looked another house. This one looks nice, said Mr. Bird. There's nobody in it. You're wrong, said Mrs. Bird. The house belongs to a foot. So they went on looking. I like this one, said Mr. Bird. It had a pretty red flap on the roof. I've always wanted a house with a flag, said Mrs. Bird. Maybe this place will be all right. But it was not all right. I guess I made a mistake, said Mr. Bird. You make too many mistakes, said Mrs. Bird. I'm going to pick the next house. And here it is, right here. They flew in. They looked around. It's not too big, asked Mr. Bird. I like this big place, said Mrs. Bird. I like the place to build our new nest. They went right to work. They needed many things to build their nest. First, some hay. I got some soda straws and broom straws, and they got some sweater string. Damn it! Don't ignore the mess, please. They got some stocking string, and mattress stuffing. They got some horse hair, some man hair. Soon they had all the hay and straw and string and stuffing and all the horse hair and the man hair they could carry. They took it all back to build their nest. Mr. and Mrs. Bird worked very hard. It took them the rest of the morning to finish their nest. The nest is really the best, said Mrs. Bird. I want to stay here forever. Mr. Bird was very happy too. He flew to the top of the house and he sang his song again. I love our house, I love our nest. It's in all the world, our nest is the best. Every day at 12 o'clock, Mr. Parker came to the church. Mr. Parker came to pull the rope. When the Rope went up the bird's new nest. The rope rang the bell, big bell, right under Mrs. Bird's nest. Boing, boing. Mr. Bird got out of there as fast. Mrs. Bird got out of there as fast as she could fly. Boing, 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 boing. May I just say something? Don't forget Mr. Bird. When Mr. Bird came in, all he could see was a mess of hay and string and stuffing and horsehair and mare hair and straw. Where's Mrs. Bird? I will look until I find her, said Mr. Bird. He looked high, he looked low, he looked everywhere for Mrs. Bird. He looked down into a chimney, but Mrs. Bird wasn't there. He looked into a water barrel, but Mrs. Bird wasn't there. Then he saw a big fat cat with a big fat smile. One fat cat's face. There were some pretty brown feathers near the fat cat's mouth. Mr. Bird begged and cried. "Oh dear," he cried. "The big fat cat has eaten Mrs. Bird." Mr. Bird flew off. "I've never seen Mrs. Bird again," he cried. It's getting dark, and it began to rain. It rained harder and harder. Mr. Bird could not see where he was going. Crash! Or ksh! Mr. Bird bumped into something. It was his old house. That old house that Mrs. Bird hated. "I'll go inside," said Mr. Bird. "I'll rest until the rain stops." Mr. Bird went inside, and there was Mrs. Bird sitting there, singing, "I love my house, I love my nest. It's in all the world, this nest is best." You're here," gasped Mr. Bird. "I thought you hated this old nest." Mrs. Bird smiled. "I used to hate it," she said, "but a mother bird can change her mind, you see. There's no nest like an old nest for a brand new bird." And when an egg popped open, the new bird thought so too. Can I just say something really quickly before we end this story and or this video? That looks exactly like the bird from Where's My Mother. If I still had that book, I would show you guys, but it does look like that bird. That was The Best Nest by P.D. Eastman.